Hello, my name is Bill Thomas. I'm a licensed battlefield guide at the Gettysburg National Battlefield. We're here today in the Gettysburg National Cemetery among 3,500 men that I admire very greatly. These are men who gave their lives so that the United States of America did not become the divided States of America. Back in 1862, in the spring, the Northerners were rather happy. Things looked good. General McClellan's Army of the Potomac was within sight of Richmond, Virginia, the capital of the Confederacy. But by the last week of June, his army was in complete retrograde motion. Things did not look good at all for the North in Virginia. And so people began to realize that the war would not be over soon, that it would take a much greater effort and many more men. And recruiting began. Now, in spite of the reverses in Virginia, there was one point of pride for the state of Pennsylvania. The Bucktail Regiment, the 13th Pennsylvania Reserves, had done quite well. A battalion of their group had fought a delaying action and allowed others to move back in an orderly retreat rather than pell-mell. They were commanded by then Major Roy Stone. Roy Stone came back to Pennsylvania in 1862 with the idea of recruiting more regiments with bucktails. That is to say, they would put deer tails in their hats as a sign that they were very special. So that was going to be their recruiting tool. Advertisements appeared in newspapers throughout the Commonwealth. Especially, there was one in Tioga County, where Alfred Sofield, who was at that time the Justice of the Peace in Tioga County, began a recruiting drive. He had what was called a war meeting on Saturday evening, August 9th of 1862. It would seem that Alfred Sofield was a very good recruiter. He filled an entire company worth of enlistments that very evening, so that by Monday morning, he was marching them towards the town of Troy, 25 miles away, which was the nearest railhead with a connection to Harrisburg. Among the men who were marching with Sofield that day were Nathan Wilcox and Edwin Dimmick. More about them later. The company arrived in Harrisburg at Camp Curtin, the very first of the companies to arrive of the men who would become the 149th Pennsylvania Regiment. They were very proud to be volunteers and not draftees. They would become part of the new Bucktails. And because they arrived first, I think, they became Company A. And Alfred Sofield was elected their captain. Alfred Sofield had left behind a wife, Helen, and 3 sons. Nathan Wilcox, not married, but his mother had been widowed several years before, and he had a young brother, only 6 years old. He's the breadwinner for the family. Well, Edwin Dimmick, we're not as sure. He may have left a wife and children, but he certainly left a mother who depended on him as well. These men marched off to war, but first they found themselves in the defenses around Washington. It was time well spent. They trained and they learned discipline. Then in the spring of 1863, they were assigned to the Army of the Potomac. Now they would for sure see combat at some point. At the Battle of Chancellorsville, they were not so much engaged. Their first test under fire would come just west of the town of Gettysburg at a place we call the Mcpherson Farm. They approached the Mcpherson Ridge just before noon on July 1st, the first day of the battle. Most historians refer to the first day of the battle, the middle of the first day, as a lull in the action. I'm pretty sure that no one in the 149th Pennsylvania would agree with that description. You see, they were already under artillery fire, both from the west and from the north. Best they could do was to lay down in a sunken lane that ran parallel to the Chambersburg Pike. As they lay there, shells are exploding all around them. Captain John Bassler from Company C tells us what happened. A shell burrowed underneath Alfred Sofield. It exploded. It tore Sofield in half. The way Bassler described it, his heels were in contact with his head. 2 more men died from the same explosion, Edwin Dimmick and Nathan Wilcox. Now, Dimmick's remains were never identified, but very likely he is buried here under the appellation unknown. And it's interesting to me that right next to Captain Sofield, we have 8 graves marked unknown from the 149th Pennsylvania. What about Nathan Wilcox? Let's go see. Now, it seems that Nathan Wilcox was only partially identified, at least at first. I'm standing here by his grave now. If you look closely, you'll see that Nathan is carved in, as is Company A, Regiment 149 here in the Pennsylvania section. But his surname, Wilcox, has simply been painted onto the stone. So for some reason, that was not known at the time the gravestones were carved. Now, what about the folks back home? What do they learn? Well, a few weeks before this battle, Captain Sofield had apparently received a letter from his wife, and it disturbed him greatly. We don't have the letter from Helen, but we do have his reply. I'd like to read a part of that reply to you. I have the blues worse than ever. To be reminded that I was so necessary to your happiness, and feeling far short of my duty as a husband, as I have been for the past 12 years, and how indulgent and forgiving you have been, causes me to feel sad indeed. If I am permitted to join you again after getting out of this war, I will atone for past errors. Well, Helen would go into a deep, deep grief. She even visited the field here, where Captain Sofield died, and visited his grave. But still, she never married again. Instead of a loving husband trying to atone for what he called past errors, she received a widow's pension of $20 a month. Corporal Wilcox, his widowed mother, would receive a pension of $8 per month. I guess if you're a private, you're not quite worth as much as a captain. I've also discovered that Edwin Dimmick's mother received a pension of $8 per month. These men put their lives on the line, and they lost their lives before they even fired a single shot in anger. We owe them all the country that we have today. I'm Bill Thomas, licensed battlefield guide at the Gettysburg National Battlefield.